A supertanker has the momentum of a falling mountain, and no algorithm can feel the current shift like I can. My name is Walter Lindquist. I'm 63 years old, and for the last 41 of those years, I've been a harbor pilot. My job is to step onto a foreign vessel the size of a skyscraper lying on its side and guide it through a channel that has less room for error than a surgeon's scalpel. I do it in fog so thick you can taste the salt. I do it in gales that try to peel the paint from the hull. I do it because I know the water. Not from a chart, not from a predictive model, but in my bones. Madison Calloway didn't know the water. She knew spreadsheets, and she knew buzzwords. She sat across a vast, sterile desk made of some kind of pale, soulless wood. Her own Master of Business Administration degree from Dartmouth was framed on the wall behind her, the ink still looking wet. It hung slightly crooked. She was 26 years old. "So, Walter," she began, without looking up from the tablet in her manicured hands. The way she said my name felt like she was handling a dusty, obsolete tool she'd found in a forgotten drawer. "As you know, the Port Authority is undergoing a significant operational realignment. We're leveraging next-generation analytics to optimize our human capital deployment." I said nothing. My hands rested on my knees. They are thick, scarred hands. Hands that have gripped railings in freezing spray and held binoculars steady in a squall. They looked out of place in this quiet, climate-controlled room that smelled faintly of bamboo and expensive perfume. "The metrics from the new scheduling software indicate a redundancy in senior pilotage," she continued, finally gracing me with her gaze. Her eyes were clear and bright and utterly devoid of understanding. "Your role has been identified as a legacy position. Your skill set, while appreciated in the past, is not aligned with our forward-looking digital transformation." Legacy position. I'd heard that one before, in memos filled with corporate jargon that meant everything and nothing. It was a clean, sterile way of calling a man obsolete, of taking 4 decades of experience and labeling it dead weight. She slid a manila envelope across the polished desert of her desk. It stopped a few feet from me, a silent demand that I meet it halfway. "This contains your severance package. It's quite generous. We've also included resources for outplacement services." I didn't move to take it. I just looked at her. I looked at the crisp white collar of her blouse, the subtle sheen of her bamboo fabric blazer, and the Apple Watch on her wrist. She had the frictionless confidence of someone who had never been truly tested, who had mistaken academic theory for tangible knowledge. She thought she was cutting a line item on a budget. She had no concept of the anchor she was letting slip. "Your access card will be deactivated at 5 o'clock, she said, her voice taking on a slight edge of impatience. "Human resources will escort you to your locker. The decision is final." A dead calm settled over me. Not anger. Not yet. It was the same feeling I get just before making the final turn into the basin, when the wind and tide are fighting each other and the whole world holds its breath. It was a moment of absolute clarity. I stood up. The chair made a slight scraping noise on the floor. I picked up the envelope. It felt impossibly light. "I understand," I said. My voice was even. For the first time, a flicker of something unsettled her. She expected a fight, yelling, maybe pleading. She didn't expect quiet acceptance. It didn't fit the narrative in her head. "Good," she said, recovering quickly. "The door's right there." I walked out of her office without another word. The HR representative, a nervous young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, was waiting for me. He walked me to the pilot station, where I cleaned out the locker I'd used since 1983. A spare set of foul-weather gear, a worn copy of Bowditch's American Practical Navigator, a framed photo of my wife, Sarah, and our son, Michael, taken on the day he graduated high school. I packed it all into a canvas sea bag. What Madison Calloway didn't know was that some assets don't show up on a spreadsheet. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, and the sweet justice that comes when experience meets arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. The drive home was quiet. My 1991 Lincoln Town car hummed along the highway, its worn leather seats a familiar comfort. The car, like me, was a relic from another time. Built with steel and powered by a simple, powerful engine you could actually work on. No touchscreens, no analytics, just a solid machine that did its job. It had 280,000 miles on the odometer, and I trusted it more than any piece of software Madison Callaway could ever buy. 11 months ago, they had hired her. She was part of a new wave of management brought in to modernize the port. The port director, a good man named Frank Gable, who had come up through the ranks, had been pushed into early retirement. His replacement was a numbers guy from a logistics conglomerate, a man who saw ships as data points and tides as predictable variables. Madison was his star pupil. Her first week, she held a mandatory synergy session. She stood in front of a dozen pilots, men with a combined 400 years of experience, and talked about paradigm shifts and disruptive innovation. She used a laser pointer to highlight graphs showing pilot response times and fuel consumption metrics. "Our goal," she'd said, beaming, "is to create a fully algorithmic dispatch system. It will analyze vessel specs, tidal patterns, and pilot availability to create the most efficient pairing possible. It will eliminate human bias and legacy preferences." Old Bill Flanagan, a pilot who'd been here even longer than I had raised a hand. "With all due respect, miss," he'd said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "there's a southerly eddy near buoy 12 that only shows up on an ebb tide when the wind is out of the northeast at more than 15 knots. It can push a high-sided car carrier 20 yards off course in a minute. Is your algorithm going to know that?" Madison had given him a tight, condescending smile. "That's exactly the kind of anecdotal data we need to move past. The system uses terabytes of historical data. It will see patterns the human eye can't." We all knew then. She saw us as the problem. Our knowledge wasn't a resource. It was anecdotal data. It was a bug to be patched. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. The house was quiet. Sarah was at her sister's for the day. It was just as well. I wasn't ready to tell her. I walked into my den, the room where I kept my books and my history. On the wall, next to my Navy discharge papers from 1979, were my licenses and certifications. Tucked in among them was a document that looked no more important than the others, but was. United States Coast Guard. Master Pilot Limited. Unlimited tonnage. Below that, a specific, critical endorsement. Authorized for vessels with a length overall, LOA, exceeding 1,000 feet within the designated pilotage waters. The breaking point came in February 2020. A new class of liquefied natural gas tankers, the QMAX carriers, started making our port a regular stop. They were behemoths, floating thermos bottles stretching 1,132 feet long. Longer than an aircraft carrier is tall. When fully loaded, their momentum was terrifying. Stopping one was less about applying brakes and more about convincing a glacier to change its mind. Because of their size and hazardous cargo, the ports insurers and the Coast Guard had laid down strict regulations. Any vessel over 1,000 feet required a pilot with that specific endorsement. To get it, you needed a minimum of 20 years of experience, a flawless safety record, and to have completed at least 50 supervised transits on similarly sized vessels. Then, you had to pass a grueling 3-day examination with a panel of Coast Guard officials who grilled you on every current, shoal, and potential hazard in the district. Back in 2013, the old port director, Frank Gable, had pulled me into his office. "Walt," he'd said, "these big LNG ships are the future. We need someone who can handle them, someone the underwriters will trust. The Port Authority will pay for your training and certification, but it's going to be your ticket. You're the only one with the sea time to even qualify." It took me nearly 2 years to earn that endorsement. I was 55 years old, studying charts and regulations like a cadet. But I got it. For the last 7 years, 2 other pilots had held the same certification. One retired to Florida. The other, a good man named Dave Jensen, had died of a heart attack on his fishing boat 2 years ago. Which left me. I knew for sure 3 weeks ago. I'd been in the dispatcher's office and saw the port call schedule for the next month. I saw the name, Polaris Dawn, a brand new Q-Max carrier on her maiden voyage from Qatar, scheduled to arrive in 2 days. Madison Calloway, in her quest to optimize, had looked at a list of pilots. She saw my name. She saw my age, 63. She saw my salary, the highest on the payroll due to seniority and specialized skill. She saw a number. She saw a legacy cost. She cross-referenced it with her algorithm, which told her there were other senior pilots available. She never bothered to read the fine print on the certifications. She never understood that titles and pay grades weren't all the same. She had the authority, but she didn't have the knowledge. And in this business, knowledge is control. I sat down at my desk and turned on my computer. I didn't look for another job. I pulled up the live marine traffic tracker for the Gulf of Mexico. I found the Polaris Dawn, a small blue icon creeping steadily towards the coast. Then I opened another window and looked up the current spot price for liquefied natural gas. I made a pot of coffee and settled in to wait. The first day was quiet. I worked in my garage, tuning up the engine on my John Deere lawn tractor. The methodical work was calming. Adjusting the carburetor, checking the spark plug, changing the oil. Simple, tangible tasks with clear results. The opposite of the world Madison Calloway inhabited. Sarah came home that evening, and I told her. She wasn't surprised. She'd seen the writing on the wall, had heard the frustration in my voice for months. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her hand resting on my arm. "I'm going to finish this coffee," I said, "and then I'm going to sleep in tomorrow, for the first time in 40 years. She looked at me, a long, searching look. She knew me better than anyone. She knew my calmness wasn't resignation. It was preparation. The call came the next afternoon, just as I knew it would. Not from Madison, not from the port director. The caller ID showed the main line for the Port Authority's legal counsel. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Walt Lindquist speaking. "Walt, it's Stephen Hayes." His voice was tight, strained. Hayes was the lead attorney for the port, a sharp guy in his 50s who wore expensive suits but had the good sense to listen to people who knew more than he did. We'd always had a decent relationship. "Steve, how are you?" I asked, keeping my tone light and neighborly. "I've been better," he admitted. "Listen, Walt, we have a situation here. And the Polaris Dawn is at the Seaboy." "Is that right?" "She made good time," I said, as if discussing the weather. I was sitting on my back porch in a wicker chair, a tall glass of iced tea sweating on the table next to me. There was a pause. I could hear muffled, agitated voices in the background of his office. "Yes, well, we seem to have a scheduling conflict with the pilot assignment. It seems the vessel requires a specific endorsement." "The Master Pilot Limited for vessels over 1,000 feet, I supplied helpfully. "That's a tricky one. Very specific insurance requirements on those LNG carriers." "Yes," Hayes said, the word clipped. "Walt, our records show you're the only active pilot with that certification." "That's correct," I said. "Or was correct. As of 5 o'clock yesterday, I'm no longer an active pilot. I'm a legacy position that's been right-sized. I have the paperwork right here." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could picture the scene perfectly. Hayes in his corner office, probably on speakerphone. The port director next to him, looking pale. And somewhere nearby, Madison Calloway, the architect of this mess, finally realizing that a spreadsheet is not the same as the sea. "Walt," Hayes said, his voice now low and urgent, This vessel is burning $150,000 a day in fuel and charter fees just sitting there. The cargo is worth north of $90 million. We can't just let it sit." "That does sound like a problem," I said. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. The ice cubes clinked against the glass. It was the only sound on my end of the line. "We need you to bring her in, Walt. Name your price for a single transit. We'll pay it." Here it was, the moment of truth. He was treating me like a contractor, a temporary fix for their colossal mistake. But they hadn't just made a scheduling error. They had broken a 41-year contract of loyalty. They had taken my life's work and dismissed it with a buzzword. This wasn't about one job. This was about the principle. "I'm not a contractor, Steve," I said calmly. "I'm a harbor pilot. Or I was. I'm not interested in a one-time fee." "Then what do you want?" he asked, a note of desperation creeping in. I set my glass down. I looked out over my lawn at the neat stripes from the freshly tuned mower. I had their full and undivided attention. "First," I said, my voice cold and clear as a winter morning, "I want my job back. Full reinstatement of my position, title, and seniority, effective immediately. My pension contributions will be made whole for the time missed." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Second," I continued, "for the inconvenience and the unprofessional manner of my termination, I want a one-time bonus of $500,000 wired to my account before I set foot on the pilot boat." This time there was an audible gasp. Someone in the room with Hayes swore under their breath. "And third," I said, delivering the final, non-negotiable term, "Madison Calloway is to be removed from any position of authority over pilotage operations. I don't care where you put her. Reassign her to accounting in the Des Moines office for all I care. But she is not to have any contact with or authority over any pilot, ever again. Her name is to be wiped from our chain of command." The silence stretched for a full minute. I let it hang in the air. I had laid the trap, and they had walked into it. Now, they were feeling the steel jaws close. "Walt, that's highly irregular," Hayes finally managed. "These are irregular circumstances, Steve," I replied. "You have a 9-figure asset blocking a federal channel, a board of directors who are about to start asking very pointed questions, and a 26-year-old MBA who caused the whole problem. My terms are the only solution on the table. You have 1 hour to call me back with an affirmative on all 3 points. If I don't hear from you, you can call the Coast Guard and explain to them why you're obstructing maritime commerce. Good luck with that." I hung up the phone. I didn't have to wait an hour. The phone rang 22 minutes later. It was Hayes. "The terms are accepted, Walt," he said. His voice was flat, defeated. "The wire transfer is being initiated now. A car will be at your house in 30 minutes. "I'll be ready," I said, and ended the call. I went inside and changed into my uniform. The familiar blue jacket, the crisp white shirt. It felt right. Sarah watched me, a small, proud smile on her face. "Give 'em hell, Walter," she said softly. "I plan on it," I replied. A black sedan, not the usual port-issued Chevy, pulled into my driveway precisely 30 minutes later. The driver opened the door for me. As we drove back to the waterfront, I saw the text message from my bank. The transfer was complete. Walking back into the pilot station was like stepping into a different world from the one I'd left 2 days ago. The usual casual banter was gone. The air was thick with tension. The younger pilots, the ones who had been polite but always slightly dismissive, looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. I had done what none of them thought was possible. I had stared down the new management and made them blink. Madison Calloway was there, standing near the dispatcher's desk. She looked pale, her usual composure completely gone. Her bamboo blazer looked wilted under the fluorescent lights. She saw me, and her face tightened. She opened her mouth to speak, but the new port director, the numbers guy, stepped in front of her. Mr. Lindquist, he said, extending a hand. His handshake was weak. Glad to have you back. I ignored his hand. I didn't look at Madison. My focus was on the job. What's the status of the Polaris Dawn? The dispatcher, a man I'd known for 20 years, slid a sheet of paper towards me. She's holding steady at the buoy, Captain. Tide is turning to flood in 40 minutes. Winds are light, out of the southwest. Get the pilot boat ready. I'm going out. As I turned to leave, I saw an HR representative talking quietly to Madison. She wasn't being yelled at. She was being erased. Quietly, efficiently, and with the same corporate detachment she had used on me. She was being reassigned to a special project analyzing inland freight data. A career graveyard. She picked up a small box of her personal items from her desk. The crooked Dartmouth frame was on top, and walked out the back door without a word. She was no longer a factor. The trip out on the pilot boat was bracing. The salt spray hit my face, washing away the sterile memory of Madison's office. Ahead, the Polaris Dawn loomed out of the haze. It didn't look like a ship. It looked like a landmass. The scale of it was hard to comprehend. Climbing the rope ladder up its vast steel side was a familiar burn in my legs and arms. On the bridge, the Greek captain greeted me with a worried expression and a firm handshake. He was a man my age, with eyes that had seen every ocean on Earth. Pilot on the bridge, I announced. Captain, I have the con. You have the con, pilot, he replied, relief washing over his face. For the next 3 hours, there was nothing else in the world but the ship, the water, and the channel. My voice was the calm center of a storm of activity. Ahead slow, port 10. Tug 1, back full on my port bow. Midships. Steady on course, 015. I wasn't looking at a screen. I was looking at the water. I saw the slight ripple that marked the edge of the shoal. I felt the subtle push of the incoming tide against the hull, a pressure no sensor could adequately measure. I anticipated the way the wind would catch the high-sided vessel as we came around the Bayport turn, the trickiest part of the transit. Madison's algorithm saw a channel. I saw a river within the sea, a living thing with moods and habits. Starboard 20, I ordered, my voice sharp, bringing the massive bow around. The ship groaned in protest, a vast creature being coaxed through a narrow gap. For a long minute, it was a delicate, terrifying ballet. A few degrees of miscalculation, a few seconds of hesitation, and we'd be aground, a multi-million-dollar ecological disaster. But there was no hesitation. I knew this turn. I'd done it 1,000 times. Ease to 10. Midships. Steady as she goes. We slid through the turn, the red channel marker gliding past the starboard wing of the bridge with less than 50 feet to spare. The whole bridge crew, silent until now, let out a collective, quiet breath. 2 hours later, we had the Polaris Dawn safely docked. The last line was secured. Engine is stopped, Captain, the first mate reported. I handed the con back to the Greek captain. He took my hand in both of his. Excellent work, pilot, he said, his voice thick with sincerity. Very professional, the best I have seen. Coming from him, it meant more than any bonus. It was a recognition from one professional to another, a testament to a skill that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. I drove home in my Lincoln as the sun was setting. The world felt right again. Sarah had dinner waiting. For the first time in as long as I could remember, my phone didn't ring. There were no urgent calls, no scheduling changes, no emergencies. Just peace. The next morning, I called my son, Michael. He was in his final year of engineering school. Hey, Dad, what's up? Just wanted to let you know, your last tuition payment is taken care of, and the rest of it. It's all covered. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Dad, that's how? Let's just say I had a good day at the office, I said. Focus on your studies, son. Make me proud. I hung up the phone and sat on the porch, my coffee steaming in the cool morning air. I thought about Madison Calloway. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction at her downfall. I felt a kind of weary pity. She was a product of a system that valued credentials over competence, theory over experience. She'd been given authority she hadn't earned and power she didn't understand. The Port Authority had made the mistake of hiring her, but her real failure was one of arrogance. She never once thought to ask one of the old guys how things actually worked. She assumed the past had nothing to teach her. They thought firing me was the end of the story. They thought they could replace a lifetime of knowledge with a few lines of code. They were wrong. They learned that there's a difference between what's written on a budget line and what holds true value. Authority is given. It's a title on a door, a box on an organizational chart. Anyone can have it, but control is earned. It's knowing the currents when the fog is down. It's understanding the weight and momentum of your decisions. It's knowing which pieces on the board can't be replaced. They gave Madison the authority, but I never gave up control. That was the lesson. It cost them $500,000 to learn it. I'd say they got it cheap.